Hello, night owls and dream seekers. Tonight's story beckons you into the shadows that stretch across the ceiling boards above our heads. Have you ever lain awake, tracking the soft footfalls that seem to echo from empty rooms? Have you ever convinced yourself it was just the house settling, while something in your gut whispered otherwise? Well then, you understand Sarah Mitchell already. So dim your lights, pull your blankets close, and join me as we discover what waits in the attic of the Pendleton house. Rain lashed against the century-old windows of 42 Maple Street as Sarah Mitchell turned the tarnished key in the front door lock. The porch light flickered, once, twice, casting her shadow in jagged strips across peeling white paint. November in New England always felt like this, cold seeping into your bones, darkness falling by mid-afternoon. Home sweet home, she whispered to no one, her breath fogging in the bitter air. After 12 years in Boston's Back Bay, fighting for sidewalk space between suited financiers and tourists, the silence of Millfield, Connecticut felt suffocating, like holding your breath underwater, like waiting for something to happen. The real estate agent had called the 3-story Victorian a steal. Sarah's mother had called it a blessing. Sarah herself didn't know what to call this unexpected inheritance from a great-aunt she barely remembered, except perhaps convenient. 32 years old, newly unemployed after her marketing firm downsized, nursing a breakup still raw enough to sting, Sarah needed a reset. And now she had one, courtesy of Aunt Evelyn Pendleton, dead 3 months prior. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and something older, something that reminded Sarah of church pews and forgotten library books. She fumbled for the light switch, wincing as ancient wiring hummed reluctantly to life. Rain-streaked shadows danced across the foyer wallpaper. Cabbage roses faded to ghostly outlines. As she dragged her suitcase across the threshold, Sarah's phone rang. Her mother, right on cue. "You made it. How's the old place holding up?" "Better than I expected," Sarah admitted, kicking the door closed against the wind. Aunt Evelyn kept it maintained. Of course she did. She loved that house more than anything. Her mother's voice softened. "More than people, sometimes." "What do you mean?" A pause, stretching just a beat too long. "Nothing. Just Evelyn changed after Thomas died in Korea, became a bit of a recluse." Sarah knew this story in fragments. Her great-uncle, dead at 23. A war hero returning in a flag-draped casket rather than on his own 2 feet. But that was ancient history, 7 decades buried. "Mom, the house is beautiful. Outdated, but solid." Sarah wandered from the foyer into what must have been the parlor, where heavy velvet curtains framed rain-blurred streetlights. And enormous. "I don't know what I'll do with all these rooms." "Just be careful with the 3rd floor," her mother said suddenly, voice sharp. "The attic." Sarah laughed. "What? Is it structurally unsound?" "No, it's—" Another pause. "Your Aunt Evelyn had rules about the attic. She never let anyone up there, not even when your grandfather helped to replace the roof in '85. "That's weird. Just promise me you'll leave it alone, at least for now. Get settled first." Later, lying in the 4-poster bed that had been her great-aunt's, listening to the storm lash against the windows, Sarah remembered those childhood summer visits. Lemonade on the wraparound porch, rocking chairs creaking in humid July heat, and always, always, Aunt Evelyn's stern reminder whenever the cousins raced upstairs. "2nd floor only, children. The attic is private. Private and dangerous." The word dangerous had thrilled 10-year-old Sarah. She'd spent one whole afternoon plotting how to sneak up there before her mother caught her lingering near the padlocked door at the end of the 2nd-floor hallway. Now, 22 years later, Sarah owned that padlock. And every floorboard, every dust mote behind it. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless. Sarah woke disoriented, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For one panicked moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality rushed back. Millfield. The inheritance. Her new life. The knock at the front door must have been what woke her. Sarah scrambled into jeans and an oversized sweater, finger-combing her dark hair as she hurried downstairs. A woman, about her mother's age, stood on the porch, clutching a ceramic casserole dish. Salt and pepper bob, LL Bean jacket, sensible shoes, the full New England welcome wagon. "I'm Eleanor Wilson from next door," the woman announced, with the practiced warmth of a lifelong small-town resident. "I knew your aunt for 40 years. Thought you might like some breakfast. Moving days are always hectic." The broccoli cheese casserole steamed in the chilly morning air. Sarah's stomach growled in immediate response. "That's incredibly kind," Sarah said, meaning it. "Please, come in. I could use the company." In the kitchen, all avocado appliances and faded gingham curtains, Eleanor moved with the familiarity of someone who'd been there 100 times before. She knew which cabinet held plates, which drawer contained silverware. "Your aunt and I had coffee every Tuesday," she explained, pouring from the percolator Sarah hadn't realized was bubbling. "For decades, until the last few years when she, well..." "When she what?" Sarah asked, accepting a steaming mug. Eleanor's smile tightened. "Became more private. A beat." "Did you sleep well? These old houses make such sounds." The swift subject change wasn't lost on Sarah. "Fine, thanks. Though I thought I heard footsteps at one point. Probably just the rain on the roof." Eleanor's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Footsteps? From where?" "Above, I think." Sarah gestured vaguely at the ceiling. "The attic, I guess." "The attic," Eleanor repeated, setting her cup down too carefully. Coffee sloshed over the rim. "You haven't been up there, have you?" Is there something wrong with it?" "Not wrong, exactly." Eleanor dabbed at the spilled coffee with a paper napkin, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "Your aunt was protective of that space, after Thomas died. Mom mentioned that too. What's up there? Family heirlooms? Valuable antiques?" "Memories," Eleanor said, and something in her tone made Sarah's skin prickle. "Just memories." That night, as a new storm gathered over Millfield, Sarah found herself standing at the end of the upstairs hallway, staring at the narrow door her child self had been so desperate to breach. Heavy gauge, steel hasp, industrial padlock. Not the kind of security you'd install to protect Christmas decorations or out-of-season clothing. She'd found the key that afternoon, tucked inside a battered volume of Tennyson's poems in the library. A small brass key with a paper tag attached. Above. Now, as thunder rattled the window panes, Sarah turned the key over in her palm. Her entire body thrummed with the inexplicable certainty that she was being watched. That the house itself, or something in it, was holding its breath. "This is ridiculous," she said aloud. "It's my house." The lock clicked open with surprising ease, as if it had been recently oiled. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a narrow staircase disappearing into darkness. Sarah fumbled for a light switch, found nothing. She pulled out her phone, activated the flashlight, and placed one foot on the bottom step. The wood creaked beneath her weight. "Hello," she called, immediately feeling foolish. Who would answer? What was she expecting? No response came except the soft patter of rain against the roof, closer now. Sarah climbed, one step at a time, flashlight beams slicing through dust motes that danced like miniature galaxies in the disturbed air. With each step, the temperature seemed to drop. By the time she reached the top, her breath clouded before her face. What her flashlight revealed was nothing like the cluttered storage space she'd expected. The attic spanned the entire footprint of the house, its pitched ceiling following the roofline, But instead of the jumbled furniture and cardboard boxes typical of such spaces, this room was arranged, intentional. A sitting area occupied the center, complete with a faded oriental rug, a velvet settee, and bookcases lined with leather-bound volumes. A writing desk stood near one dormer window, papers stacked neatly beside an antique fountain pen. And in the center of it all, facing the room's single round window, sat a rocking chair, moving gently, back and forth, as if someone had just vacated it. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the beam of her flashlight tracked across the immaculate furniture. This wasn't storage. This was a living space, a sanctuary. Beside the rocking chair sat a small table bearing a delicate china teacup and a leather-bound journal. Sarah approached slowly, half expecting someone to materialize from the shadows and demand what she was doing there. The teacup was empty but unstained, recently washed. The journal's leather cover was butter-soft from handling. She opened it, unsure what she was looking for. The handwriting that greeted her was elegant but unmistakably troubled, the script slanting more dramatically with each entry, the pen sometimes pressing so hard it had torn the paper. "Thomas came to me again last night," read the first entry Sarah's flashlight illuminated. "He looks just as he did before shipping out. My handsome soldier. He says the cold is the worst part, a cold that never leaves his bones. I've brought every quilt in the house up here, but he says nothing helps except my presence. He begs me not to leave him alone in this room. I've promised I won't." The date at the top of the page, April 17th, 1953. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned to the next entry. "Doctor, Harrison suggested I'm having a nervous breakdown. Grief-induced hallucinations, he called it. He wanted to send me to that awful place in Hartford. As if I'd leave Thomas alone here, with no one to talk to him, no one to read him the newspaper, so he knows what's happening in the world he died to protect." I smiled and nodded and promised to consider treatment. Men like Harrison know nothing of devotion. A sudden gust of wind rattled the round window, making Sarah jump. The flashlight beam wavered, sending shadows leaping across the walls. Something scraped across the floor behind her, the sound of furniture shifting, or footsteps. Sarah whirled around, heart in her throat. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, the kind of heavy silence that feels like a held breath. She turned back to the journal, suddenly desperate to understand what she'd stumbled into. "I've changed the lock on the attic door," read an entry from autumn 1953. "That Wilson woman next door is too curious for her own good. Says she's worried about me. Says I'm not myself. As if she'd know who I truly am. As if anyone would understand what Thomas and I have now, a bond that transcends even death. No one can help us. No one can know. Thomas is mine to care for now, just as he always cared for me." A soft creak from the rocking chair drew Sarah's attention. It was moving again, a gentle, rhythmic rocking that couldn't be explained by drafts or the house settling. Something that raised the fine hairs on the back of her neck. She flipped quickly to the final pages of the journal, where the elegant handwriting had deteriorated into frantic scrawls. "It isn't Thomas. God help me, it was never Thomas. I see that now. Those aren't his eyes. That isn't his voice, growing colder with each visit. Last night it stood at the foot of the chair while I slept, just watching. When I asked what it wanted, it smiled in a way my Thomas never would have smiled. I'm afraid, for the first time, I'm truly afraid of what I've invited into this house." The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before Aunt Evelyn's death according to the obituary Sarah had read, sent ice through her veins. "I cannot leave now, it won't let me, but I've found a way to contain it. Symbols and salt lines and prayers from traditions older than this town. They hold it here in this room. Whoever reads this, whoever comes after, never remove the lock. Never open the door. What waits in the attic isn't family. It was never family. It just wears their faces. The journal slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, hitting the oriental rug with a muffled thud. Behind her, something exhaled, a long, satisfied sound. Sarah ran, blindly, desperately, nearly tumbling down the narrow stairs in her haste. She slammed the attic door shut, fingers fumbling with the padlock until it clicked into place with a sound like deliverance. Only then, leaning against the wall with her heart threatening to crack her ribs, did she realize she'd left the journal behind. Left it in that room, with whatever else waited there. Sleep eluded her that night. Sarah lay rigid in the four-poster bed, ears straining for sounds from above. They came just after midnight, slow, deliberate footsteps tracking back and forth across the ceiling. Pacing, waiting. "It's the house settling," she whispered to the darkness. "Just old beams contracting in the cold. But houses don't pace. Houses don't stop directly above your bed and stand silent, as if listening. Houses don't whisper your name in a voice so achingly familiar it brings tears to your eyes." Sarah, so soft she might have imagined it. In her father's voice. Her father, dead these 5 years from an aneurysm that took him between one heartbeat and the next. "Sarah, I've missed you so much." She pressed her palms against her ears, tears hot on her cheeks. "It's not real. It's not him." "Don't you want to see me again?" The voice continued, closer now, as if speaking through the very ceiling. "Don't you have questions you never got to ask? Don't you want to know if I'm proud of you?" The last sentence, the one thing she'd always desperately wanted to know, broke something in her chest. Sarah scrambled out of bed, grabbing her phone and car keys. She couldn't stay here, not tonight. Not with that voice filtering through the floorboards, wearing her deepest need like a second skin. She made it as far as the bedroom door before she realized she had nowhere to go. No friends in Millfield yet. No family closer than Boston. And outside, the November storm had intensified, rain giving way to sleet that ticked against the windows like impatient fingernails. Sarah slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest. Above, the footsteps resumed their pacing. Back and forth, like a predator in a too-small cage. Morning found her curled on the hardwood, phone clutched in her hand like a talisman. Watery sunlight filtered through lace curtains, making the night's terror seem distant and ridiculous. But the shadows beneath her eyes, as she studied her reflection, told a different story. She called Eleanor Wilson. "The attic," she said without preamble, when the older woman answered. "Did my aunt ever tell you what was up there?" A long pause. "She didn't have to," Eleanor finally replied, voice tight. "My mother knew Evelyn when they were young, before Thomas died, before she started claiming he had returned to her. I found her journal. Then I know something is up there, something that pretends to be people we've lost." Eleanor sighed, a sound of both confirmation and resignation. "The Pendleton house has always been different," she said softly. "Built on old ground, the kind the Pequot tribe would never set foot on, according to town records. The original owner, Jeremiah Pendleton, dabbled in things best left untouched. Seances, spirit photography, attempts to bridge the gap between worlds." "What do I do?" Sarah asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "What Evelyn did, keep it contained, keep the door locked. A beat, or sell the house and never come back. There are always buyers for historic homes, even with quirks." But Sarah didn't want to sell. Despite everything, the house felt like hers now, a connection to family she'd never truly known. To history she'd always felt detached from, in her glossy Boston condo with its stainless appliances and view of nothing but other condos. That night, she armed herself with her father's Louisville Slugger, the one thing of his she'd insisted on keeping after the funeral. The polished wood felt solid in her hands as she settled into bed, determined to ignore whatever came from above. The voice began earlier this time, more insistent. Sa'ara. Not quite her father's voice now, the Boston accent stretched into something wrong, like a record played too slowly. Don't you love me anymore? Don't you miss me? She squeezed her eyes shut. You're not my dad. A low chuckle, not angry, but amused, indulgent. I can be anyone you want, anyone you've lost, your father, your high school friend Jessie who wrapped her car around that oak tree on prom night. That boyfriend. What was his name? Michael? Who left you for your roommate? Didn't you wish he was dead sometimes after that? Didn't you lie awake imagining what you'd say at his funeral? Sarah sat up, anger flaring hot enough to momentarily eclipse her fear. Shut up! Such fire, the voice purred. Evelyn had it too at first, before I wore her down. Before she gave me what I needed. You'll do the same in time. They all do. What do you want? Sarah demanded. Company, the voice said simply. It's lonely between worlds. I just want what every soul wants. Connection, to be remembered, to matter. Despite her revulsion, Sarah felt a twinge of something. Pity? Understanding? The desperate loneliness in the voice seemed genuine, at least. If I talk to you, through the door, would that be enough? A long silence from above, then softer. For now. And so began the strangest roommate arrangement in Millfield's long history. Each evening, Sarah would sit at the top of the second-floor landing, her back against the wall beside the locked attic door. And she would talk. About her day, about her memories, about her slowly forming plans to convert the first floor of the house into a remote workspace for her freelance marketing business. From behind the door, the entity would listen, occasionally ask questions, sometimes offer observations about the changing seasons or the neighbor's habits that suggested it could somehow see beyond the attic walls. It never again pretended to be her father or anyone else she'd lost. During daylight hours, Sarah researched the history of the house, the symbols Evelyn had mentioned in her journal. She found them, hidden behind peeling wallpaper in the attic stairwell, protection glyphs from half a dozen different traditions. She carefully restored them, repainted them when needed. Eleanor brought her books from the town's historical society, records of Jeremiah Pendleton and his rumored experiments in spiritualism, photographs of seances held in what was now Sarah's parlor, attendees' faces blurred by long exposures but their expressions unmistakably rapt. You're not trying to banish it, are you? Eleanor asked one December afternoon, worry lines deepening around her eyes. Those who've tried, it doesn't end well. No, Sarah assured her. Just maintaining the boundaries, keeping the balance. Months passed. Winter settled over Millfield like a heavy blanket, bringing snow that transformed the grim November landscape into something from a Courier and Ives print. Sarah's evening talks with the entity, which she had privately begun to call Thomas, though she knew it wasn't her great-uncle, became a strange comfort in the isolated winter nights. Were you ever human? She asked one evening, as wind howled around the eaves. A contemplative silence from behind the door. Parts of me were once, very long ago. And the rest is hunger, loneliness, need. Sarah nodded, though the entity couldn't see her. I understand loneliness. A scraping sound came then, right on the other side of the door, as if Thomas was sitting just inches away from her, separated only by wood and metal and symbols of protection. You could open the door, it suggested, voice gentle. Just once, just to see. I could show you my true self, not a borrowed face. Sarah's hand actually moved toward the padlock before she caught herself. Number? This arrangement works for both of us. Let's not change it. A soft sigh from beyond the door. As you wish, for now. That night, Sarah dreamed of the attic, of the rocking chair by the window, of a figure sitting there, not her father, not her great-uncle, but something older, something watching her with patient, ancient eyes, waiting. In the dream, she approached it without fear, drawn by a curiosity stronger than survival instinct. "What are you, really?" she asked. The figure smiled with too many teeth. "The oldest hunger," it said in a voice like rustling autumn leaves. "The first question humans ever asked, is this all there is? Is death truly the end? I am the answer they wanted to hear." Sarah woke, gasping, the dream still vivid behind her eyes. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes, muffling the world. Her bedside clock read 3:17 a.m., that dead hour when hospitals record the most deaths when the human body is at its lowest ebb. She reached for her phone, needing its cool glass solidity, its connection to the wider world. A notification pulsed on the screen. One new message, sent at exactly 3 a.m. from an unknown number. "Would you like to know what really lurks in the attic of the Pendleton house? The truth about what Evelyn found? What she became? I can show you, tonight, midnight." Sarah stared at the message, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly as she considered her response. Above her head, she heard soft laughter. And so, our story rests for tonight, suspended in that moment of choice. What truly lurks in the attic of the Pendleton house? Is it safely contained behind Aunt Evelyn's protections, or merely biding its time? And that mysterious text message, who could have sent it when the entity was supposedly locked away in the attic? If this tale has followed you into the shadows of your own bedroom, I'd love to know your theories. What do you think Sarah should do? Is the entity a displaced spirit? Something more ancient and hungry? Or perhaps something Sarah herself brought with her from Boston? A manifestation of her own losses and loneliness? Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed falling asleep to this particular nightmare. Share it with friends who appreciate the comfort of controlled fear. And subscribe for more stories that linger in that twilight space between waking and dreaming. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you inherited a house with a locked attic and strict instructions never to open the door? Would curiosity win out over caution? Or would you respect the boundaries left by those who came before? Sweet dreams, or perhaps sweet nightmares. Story number 2. The whispering started on the third night. Not the ordinary creaks and moans of an old house settling. No, these were actual words, flowing like cold water through the darkness of my bedroom. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once, impossible to locate yet unmistakably present. And they knew my name. "Whitney, come see, Whitney, we've been waiting." That's when I knew I'd made a terrible mistake coming to the Blackwood house. By then, it was already too late. Let me back up. You're probably wondering how I ended up alone in America's most notoriously haunted Victorian mansion during the darkest phase of the October moon. The simple answer? Desperation and ambition. A dangerous combination in any profession, but especially treacherous for a struggling content creator like myself. 3 weeks ago, my travel channel, Wandering with Whitney, was on life support. After 2 years of grinding out videos, I was still stuck at 15,000 subscribers while my competitors soared past the coveted 100K mark. My savings had dwindled to nothing. My parents were dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about real jobs with benefits, and I was seriously considering throwing in the towel. That's when Jake, my cameraman and best friend since our Northwestern days, mentioned the Blackwood House legend. "It's perfect for Halloween season," he said, sliding his phone across the sticky diner table to show me an image of a looming 3-story Victorian mansion, its red brick facade darkened by decades of New England weather. Nobody's stayed overnight there in 15 years. Not since that paranormal investigation team fled at 3 a.m. and refused to explain why. I pushed the phone back, unimpressed. Another supposedly haunted house? Been there, filmed that. The algorithm buried those videos. This isn't just another spooky house, Whit. Jake's voice dropped, even though we were the only customers in the roadside diner. The Blackwood disappearances were real. 7 people vanished inside that house between 1897 and 1954. No bodies ever found, no explanations ever given. The locals won't even drive down Maple Street after dark. I took another sip of lukewarm coffee. My interest reluctantly peaked. So, what's the hook? The hook is that tomorrow marks exactly 125 years since Eleanor Blackwood supposedly murdered her husband William and then took her own life in the master bedroom. The anniversary only falls on a full moon once every few decades. His eyes gleamed with excitement. We film a 3-night special leading up to the anniversary. If nothing happens, we edit in some jump scares. If something does happen, viral content. I finished his thought, the wheels already turning. Exactly. And the best part? The historical society that owns the property is practically begging for publicity. We can shoot there for free. 24 hours later, we were pulling up to the iron gates of 1437 Maple Street, in the small town of Willow Creek, Massachusetts, the autumn leaves swirling around our rented SUV like crimson confetti. Mr. Collins, the caretaker, was not what I expected. I'd pictured a crusty old janitor with a ring of skeleton keys and a cryptic warning. Instead, he was a trim, silver-haired man in his 60s, wearing pristine khakis and a button-down shirt with the Historical Society's logo. He greeted us with the practiced warmth of someone used to giving tours to disinterested school groups. The Blackwood house was completed in 1872, he recited, as he led us through rooms draped in white sheets, commissioned by textile magnate William Blackwood as a wedding gift for his young bride, Eleanor. And where did they, die? I asked, trying to sound nonchalant as Jake silently filmed everything. Mr. Collins' smile tightened almost imperceptibly. The master bedroom on the 3rd floor is where the tragedy occurred, yes. That's where you'll be staying, Miss Parker. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October draft whistling through the century-old windows. I'll be staying in the actual death room? Historical Society's orders, he replied with an apologetic shrug. They want the authenticity for your videos. Your cameraman will be in the adjoining servants' quarters. I'll be off-site but available by phone for emergencies. As we continued the tour, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Collins was holding something back. He answered our questions about the architecture, the furniture, even the infamous Blackwood family scandals, but he kept glancing at his watch. "Is there somewhere you need to be?" I finally asked. He hesitated before answering. "No one stays in this house past sundown anymore, not even me." Something in his voice had changed, the tour guide polish giving way to genuine unease. "The last caretaker who spent the night was my predecessor. That was in 2009. What happened to him?" Jake asked, lowering his camera. Mr. Collins checked his watch again. He left his post at 3:17 a.m. according to security logs. Called the Historical Society the next day to quit. Moved to Arizona, I believe. He cleared his throat. "I should be going. Sunset in 40 minutes. He handed me a heavy brass key with an intricate B worked into its design. "For the master bedroom. The Historical Society prefers that room remains locked when not in use, for preservation purposes." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Mr. Collins, you never told us what happened to your predecessor. Why did he quit?" The caretaker paused at the front door, silhouetted against the amber glow of the setting sun. "He claimed someone was whispering his name through the walls all night. Said it wasn't Eleanor's voice." He stepped outside, said it was Williams. The massive oak door swung shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid closing. "Well," Jake said into the sudden silence, "that was suitably dramatic. He'll definitely make the final cut." But I barely heard him. My attention had been captured by something else entirely. A portrait hanging at the top of the grand staircase that I could have sworn wasn't there during our tour. A stern-faced man with deep-set eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. William Blackwood. And though it was surely a trick of the fading light, I could have sworn those painted eyes followed me as we carried our equipment upstairs. The first night passed uneventfully, almost disappointingly so. We filmed atmospheric B-roll of moonlight casting long shadows across the floorboards, my hand trembling as I turned doorknobs, my face illuminated by flashlight as I recounted the Blackwood legend for the camera. The standard haunted house routine that had worked moderately well for my channel in the past. "Nothing's happening," I whispered to Jake around midnight as we reviewed footage in the parlor. Should we fake something? Maybe a door slowly closing on its own? Jake shook his head. "Not yet. Let's give it time. Besides, night 2 and 3 are usually when activity ramps up in these places. People get comfortable, their guard drops." He was right, of course. And God, I wish he hadn't been. The second night began like the first, quiet, cold, and disappointingly ghost-free. We set up static cameras in the hallways in the notorious master bedroom, where I'd again be sleeping alone for maximum viewer engagement. After filming some segments for the next day's upload, Jake retreated to the servants' quarters across the hall. At my insistence, we left both doors ajar. I remember checking the time on my phone, 11:42 p.m., before finally drifting off to sleep beneath the heavy damask canopy of Eleanor Blackwood's deathbed. I awoke with a violent start at exactly 3:17 a.m., though I wouldn't realize the significance of that time until later. Something had pulled me from a dreamless sleep into heart-pounding alertness. The room was pitch black, save for the tiny red recording light on the static camera across the room. That's when I heard it for the first time. Whitney ... My name, breathed rather than spoken, seemed to come from inside the wall behind my head. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly small in the darkness. "Jake, is that you?" Silence answered me. Then, just as I was convincing myself I'd imagined it, "Come see what we found." I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight with shaking fingers. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty bedroom. The door to the hallway remained ajar, exactly as I'd left it. "This isn't funny, Jake," I said loudly, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. But deep down, I knew it wasn't him. The voice had been all wrong, raspy, almost wet-sounding, like someone speaking through a mouthful of liquid. I was about to call out again when my light caught something that stopped the words in my throat. The large, ornate mirror above the fireplace, its gold frame tarnished with age, wasn't reflecting the room correctly. Where I should have seen my own terrified face illuminated by my phone's flashlight, I instead saw a woman in a white nightgown, her back to me, brushing her long dark hair with the slow, methodical strokes. Eleanor Blackwood. Had to be. Yet somehow, this silent vision was less terrifying than the whispering. There was something almost peaceful about her, something profoundly sad. Then she turned, and I saw her face. Or rather, I saw the absence of a face. Where features should have been was only smooth, blank skin, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a pale oval of nothing. I screamed then, a raw, primal sound that tore from my throat. The mirror abruptly returned to normal, reflecting only my horrified expression. Seconds later, Jake burst into the room, his own phone flashlight bouncing wildly as he ran to my side. "What happened? What did you see?" I told him everything, the whispering, the woman in the mirror, the terrible blankness where her face should have been. As I spoke, I could see the excitement building in his eyes, replacing his initial concern. "Did the static cam get it?" he asked, already moving toward the equipment. "I don't know, maybe. It was pointed at the bed, not the mirror. But when we checked the footage, there was nothing unusual. Just me, sleeping peacefully, then suddenly sitting bolt upright and screaming. No whispers, no voices. Even worse, at exactly 3:17 a.m. there was a 3-minute gap in the recording, as if the camera had momentarily lost power. "Equipment malfunction?" I suggested hopefully. Jake shook his head, staring at the timestamp. The battery was full, and it's still recording now. Something made it stop. He looked up at me, his face pale in the glow of the viewfinder. "Whitney, we need to set up more cameras. Audio recorders, too, in the walls if possible." "In the walls?" I repeated incredulously. "You want to go knocking holes in a historical landmark?" "Not holes. There's an old servants' passage that runs behind this room. Mr. Collins mentioned it in the tour. We could place a recorder there." I hesitated, torn between my growing fear and the tantalizing possibility of capturing genuine paranormal evidence. "Let's wait until morning," I finally said. "Everything's creepier at 3 a.m., but morning brought no comfort." As the pale October sun filtered through the heavy curtains, we discovered something that made my blood run cold. On the antique vanity mirror, written in what looked like condensation but couldn't possibly be in the cold, dry room, were 2 words: "Find him." The third day passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Jake was like a man possessed, rigging additional cameras, setting up audio recorders in the walls, even bringing in UV lights to catch anything our normal cameras might miss. I went along with it, partly because his enthusiasm was infectious, but mostly because focusing on the technical aspects kept me from dwelling on what waited for us that night. Mr. Collins arrived around noon with sandwiches from the local deli and a strange expression when he saw our expanded setup. "You're really staying for the third night?" he asked, watching Jake tape an infrared sensor to the ceiling. "Even after what you experienced? That's kind of the point," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Tonight's the anniversary, October 17th. If anything's going to happen, it'll be tonight." He nodded slowly. "William killed Eleanor with her hairbrush, you know. That part never made the official record." I stared at him. "I thought she killed him, then herself. That's what all the articles say. That's what Eleanor's family wanted people to believe. But the maid who found her body told a different story before they silenced her. Said Eleanor's skull was caved in and her silver hairbrush was missing. Never found William's body, but they found bloody handprints along the servants' passage. Man-sized handprints." He absently straightened a stack of our equipment. "Some wounds leave impressions stronger than others, Miss Parker. Some betrayals echo longer than a century." "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded. "Because you're staying in her room on the anniversary?" His eyes met mine directly for the first time. "And I'm not sure she's the one you should be afraid of." After he left, I cornered Jake in the hallway. "We need to leave, now." "Are you kidding? After what Collins just told us? This is gold, Whitney, pure gold." He gripped my shoulders with an intensity that startled me. "One more night, that's all I'm asking. If we capture even a fraction of what you experienced last night, this video will explode. Your channel could hit 1 million subscribers. And if something happens to us," his grin was almost feverish, "then we'll be the most famous paranormal investigators who ever lived." In the end, I relented. We spent the remainder of the daylight hours filming segments about the new information Mr. Collins had shared, speculating about what might happen that night, building anticipation for our viewers. It was good content, I had to admit. the kind that would keep people watching to the very end. As sunset approached, Jake made one final adjustment to the camera in my room. "I've set all the equipment to run automatically," he explained. "That way, if something happens to the power, we'll still have battery backup for at least 8 hours. "That's reassuring," I said dryly. He grinned. "Hey, no matter what happens, we're getting out of here first thing tomorrow, and we'll have enough footage for a whole series." But as darkness fell over the Blackwood house for the third and final night, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow was a lot further away than it should be. That brings me back to where I started this story. The whispering began at exactly 3:17 a.m., pulling me from a fitful sleep into a nightmare. "Whitney, come see Whitney. We've been waiting." This time, I didn't call out, didn't reach for my phone. I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe if I pretended to be asleep, the voice would go away. "We know you're awake, Whitney." My eyes flew open involuntarily. The room was pitch black except for the small red recording light across the room. And a second light, a faint bluish glow coming from the vanity mirror. I slowly turned my head toward it, unable to stop myself. The mirror no longer reflected the darkened bedroom. Instead, it showed a narrow passage, stone-walled and lit by what looked like bioluminescent fungi growing in the cracks. A servant's passage. "Find him," whispered a new voice, softer, feminine. Eleanor's voice, I realized with absolute certainty. "Find me," countered the first voice, harsh and wet. Despite every survival instinct screaming at me to stay put, I found myself rising from the bed, drawn toward the glowing mirror. As I approached, I saw my reflection gradually replaced by the passage, as if the mirror were becoming a window or a door. "Jake!" I tried to scream, but it came out as barely a whisper. The passage in the mirror seemed to beckon, the blue fungi pulsing like a heartbeat. And there, at the very edge of visibility, I could see something moving. A figure, crawling on all fours, coming closer. I backed away from the mirror, finally finding my voice. "Jake!" The door to my room crashed open, Jake's flashlight beam momentarily blinding me. "What's happening? Are you okay?" I pointed a trembling hand at the vanity, but the mirror now showed only our reflections, pale and frightened in the harsh light. "It was here," I said, my voice breaking. A passage, someone, something, was coming through the mirror. Jake swung his flashlight around the room, then rushed to check the cameras. "The equipment's still running. We might have caught something." His excitement was barely contained. "What exactly did you see?" Before I could answer, a loud crash came from somewhere below us, like furniture being overturned. We both froze. "What was that?" I whispered. Another crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, coming up the main staircase. Jake's expression shifted from excitement to uncertainty. Maybe Mr. Collins came back? But we both knew it wasn't Mr. Collins. No one would enter a supposedly haunted house at 3:30 in the morning. Unless... "The cameras," Jake suddenly said. "Maybe someone saw our live stream setup and decided to mess with us." It was a rational explanation, and I desperately wanted to believe it. But then the footsteps reached our floor, and a new sound joined them. A wet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the wooden floorboards. Jake moved toward the door, his camera in one hand, flashlight in the other. "I'm going to check it out." "Are you insane?" I hissed, grabbing his arm. "We need to barricade the door." "Think about it, Whitney. If this is a real paranormal event, it's the opportunity of a lifetime. If it's just some local kids pulling a prank, we need to catch them red-handed." He gently removed my hand. "I'll be right back." Before I could stop him, he slipped out into the darkened hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. I heard his footsteps moving cautiously away, then his voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" followed by silence. I waited, counting my heartbeats, each second stretching into eternity. 10 seconds, 20, 30. "Jake?" I called softly through the crack in the door. No response. I was reaching for the doorknob when I heard it. A wet gurgling sound, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of liquid. It was coming from right outside my door. "Jake, this isn't funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The door slowly began to open, seemingly of its own accord. I backed away until my legs hit the edge of the bed. The hallway beyond the door was cloaked in absolute darkness. Not even the ambient moonlight that had filtered through the windows earlier penetrated that void. And then, breaking that perfect blackness, a hand appeared on the edge of the door. A man's hand, pale and bloated as if it had been underwater for weeks. The fingers ending in broken, blackened nails. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch in mute horror as a figure gradually emerged from the darkness. It wore the tattered remains of what had once been fine clothes, a suit from another century, now green with mold and rot. Its face was mostly gone, the features dissolved into a nightmarish landscape of exposed bone and congealed matter, but the eyes remained, milky white and fixed directly on me. William Blackwood. After 125 years in the walls of his house, he had finally emerged. In his ruined hand he clutched a silver hairbrush, crusted with something dark that could only be Eleanor's blood. "Found you," the thing gurgled, taking a shambling step into the room. What happened next is still fragmented in my memory. I remember screaming. Remember diving for the window, thinking only of escape. Remember the rotting hands catching my ankle, dragging me back. Then a blinding flash of light filled the room. Not Jake's flashlight, but something brighter, purer. Standing between me and the monstrosity that had been William Blackwood was a woman in a white nightgown, her back to me, her long dark hair hanging loose. Eleanor. The two figures collided in a silent explosion of light and darkness, like matter and antimatter annihilating each other. The blast knocked me against the wall, and for a moment, consciousness fled. When I came to, sunlight was streaming through the windows. I was lying on the floor of the bedroom, which looked completely undisturbed. No sign of the previous night's horror. Jake was gone. Not just from the room, but from the house entirely. His camera lay in the hallway where I'd last heard his voice, still recording, but with its battery drained. His car remained parked outside, his overnight bag still in the servants' quarters. All the footage from our static cameras was missing. Not deleted, but as if it had never been recorded in the first place. I called the police, of course. They searched the house, the grounds, the surrounding woods, found nothing. They took my statement with the thinly veiled skepticism of small-town cops dealing with a hysterical city girl. Their working theory: Jake had gotten footage of something so incredible he'd decided to keep it for himself, abandoning me and our partnership for solo fame. It's been 3 weeks now. No sign of Jake, no body, no evidence of foul play. Just another disappearance to add to the Blackwood house's sinister legacy. The Historical Society has closed the house for renovations, and Mr. Collins has taken an indefinite leave of absence. I've been staying in a motel on the outskirts of Willow Creek, unable to leave until I find out what happened to Jake. Each night, I dream of the servants' passage behind the walls, the same passage from the mirror. In my dreams, I'm crawling through it, following the sound of Jake's voice calling my name. And each morning, I wake to find the silver hairbrush on my nightstand, the one William used to kill Eleanor, the one that was never found. It appears no matter how many times I throw it away, no matter how far I run. Last night, I finally worked up the courage to examine the hairbrush more closely. Turning it over, I found something engraved on the back. Not Eleanor's initials as I'd expected, but a message, the letters freshly carved into the aged silver. Your turn now. I don't know what it means. Don't know if Eleanor saved me only to claim me for herself, or if William is still out there waiting for the next anniversary. All I know is that I check every mirror I pass now, terrified of what might be looking back. So I'm sharing this story as both a warning and a plea. If anyone has information about Jake's whereabouts, or about the history of the Blackwood house that might explain what happened to us, please reach out. The local police have given up, but I haven't. And if you're watching this and you've experienced something similar, a place where the walls whisper your name, where reflections show impossible things, tell me your story in the comments below. Maybe together we can make sense of what lies beyond the mirror. Because here's the truly terrifying part. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., my phone receives a text message from Jake's number. They contain only 3 words, over and over again. Come find me. And sometimes in the background of my apartment, my perfectly normal 20th floor Chicago apartment, I swear I can hear the soft, steady strokes of a silver hairbrush through long dark hair. Have you ever heard whispers through your walls? Have you ever seen something in a mirror that shouldn't be there? Let me know in the comments, and if you're brave enough to hear more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. I'll be posting updates about my search for Jake every week. Because I'm going back to the Blackwood house. I don't have a choice anymore. The whispers won't let me rest until I do. Story number 3. Have you ever felt someone watching you in an empty room? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you're completely alone, or should be? What if I told you that sometimes the dead have unfinished business, and they might choose you to help them finish it? Sarah Miller felt it again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. She froze mid-motion, a stack of dusty books clutched against her chest, and slowly turned toward the empty doorway behind her. Nothing. Just shadows and silence in the cavernous entryway of Blackwood Manor. Then the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her bones. 12 sonorous gongs echoed through the house, each one reverberating in her chest like a second heartbeat. Still keeping perfect time after all these years, she whispered, her breath visible in the chilly air. The clock shouldn't work. Nothing this old should work without maintenance. But Grandma Ellie had mentioned it in her final letter. The clock that never stopped. Not once in 130 years, not even when the electricity failed during the blizzard of '98 that had buried Millfield, Massachusetts, under 3 feet of snow for a week. Sarah set the books down on a dust-covered side table and pulled her wool cardigan tighter. October in New England was unforgiving, and the ancient heating system groaned like a dying beast as it struggled to push warmth through the sprawling Victorian mansion. She glanced at her phone. 12:01 a.m. and 17 missed calls from her editor in Boston. 3 weeks past deadline and counting. "Not now, Diane," she muttered, silencing the phone. The advance for her second novel had paid for 6 months of living expenses, the 6 months that had just elapsed with barely a chapter written. Her debut psychological thriller had been a critical darling but a commercial disappointment. The sophomore effort needed to sell, or her brief career as an author was over. When Grandma Ellie's will had revealed that Sarah, not her father, would inherit Blackwood Manor, it had seemed like a divine intervention. A historic mansion in a quaint New England town far from the distractions of Boston, where she could write in peaceful solitude. What was it Ellie used to say? Blackwood Manor chooses its owners, Sarah. The house knows who belongs here. A floorboard creaked somewhere upstairs, the distinctive pop of century-old wood settling. Sarah's eyes darted to the grand staircase that curved upward into darkness. Just the house settling. Old houses made noises, that's all, except Grandma Ellie's stories. The ones told in hushed tones at family gatherings, the ones that made Sarah's father storm from the room, the ones about footsteps in empty hallways and piano music with no player. Ghost stories. Her father would spit whenever the subject arose. Nothing but the delusions of a lonely widow. But Ellie never backed down. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Richard," she would reply calmly, "than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Now, alone in the massive house her grandmother had occupied for 60 years, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if there had been more truth than fiction in those stories. Morning transformed Blackwood Manor. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden shafts of light. The sinister shadows of night retreated, revealing elegant crown molding, hand-carved banisters, and faded damask wallpaper that had once been the height of Victorian luxury. Sarah carried her coffee onto the wraparound porch, the wooden boards still solid beneath her feet despite their age. Beyond the overgrown gardens, rolling hills blazed with autumn color. Crimson maples, golden oaks, the fiery orange of sugar maples. In the distance, Blackwood Lake shimmered like polished silver. Well, I'll be damned. Someone's finally moved into the old haunted house. Sarah startled, nearly spilling her coffee. A man stood at the bottom of the porch steps, maybe mid-30s, with the weathered complexion of someone who worked outdoors. He wore a faded Red Sox cap, jeans, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. "Sorry," he said, noticing her reaction. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you. Mike Reynolds." He extended a calloused hand. "I own the hardware store in town. You must be Eleanor Miller's granddaughter." "Sarah," she confirmed, descending the steps to shake his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "News travels fast." "Small town," Mike said with a shrug. "Population 812. 813 now, I guess." His eyes traveled past her to the house. "Place needs work. Roof's got maybe 3 years left, and those gutters won't make it through winter. Are you this forward with all the newcomers, or am I special?" Sarah asked, one eyebrow raised. Mike's laugh was unexpectedly warm. "Just offering my professional assessment. And maybe looking for an excuse to meet the mystery woman who inherited the infamous Blackwood Manor." "Infamous? You don't know the stories?" Mike seemed genuinely surprised. "This place is practically a landmark on New England ghost tours. They stop the buses on the main road and point up the hill." He studied her face. "Your grandmother never mentioned it." Sarah thought of her father's furious insistence that Eleanor's delusions not be discussed at family gatherings. "My dad wasn't big on ghost stories." "Smart man," Mike said, but something in his tone suggested otherwise. "Anyway, if you need supplies or contractor recommendations, stop by Reynolds Hardware on Main Street. Can't miss it. Only hardware store in town." As he walked back to his truck, Sarah called after him, "Mike, what exactly do they say about this house?" He turned, his expression unreadable. "That it doesn't like to be alone." Sarah spent the day exploring, clipboard in hand, cataloging repairs and making notes about potential renovations. The house had good bones, as realtors like to say, but decades of minimal maintenance had taken their toll. There were so many rooms. A formal dining room with a mahogany table that seated 16, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a music room, though curiously no piano, 5 bedrooms upstairs, and numerous smaller rooms whose original purposes had been lost to time. The attic and basement remained unexplored. Sarah wasn't ready to admit it was because of Mike's words, or the way the basement door seemed to vibrate slightly when she passed it, as if something on the other side were tapping gently, asking to be let out. By nightfall, exhaustion had overcome her misgivings. She fell into Ellie's 4-poster bed, the down comforter enveloping her like a cloud, and was asleep almost instantly. The piano woke her. Sarah's eyes snapped open in the darkness. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:13 a.m., its red numbers the only source of light in the room. A nocturne. Chopin, if her college music appreciation class served her memory correctly. The notes drifted up the stairs and under her door, melancholy and precise, flawless playing. But there was no piano in the house. She had explored every room except the basement and attic. Sarah sat up, heart hammering against her ribs. The melody continued, joined now by what sounded like a woman humming along softly, her voice rising and falling with the crescendos. It wasn't coming from a neighbor's house. Blackwood Manor sat on 20 acres, the nearest neighbor half a mile away. It wasn't a recording. The music had an immediacy, a presence that filled the house. "This isn't happening," she whispered. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. Sarah slid out of bed, the hardwood floor cold against her bare feet. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. "Hello?" she called, her voice sounding small in the large room. "Is someone there?" The music stopped abruptly, mid-phrase, as if the pianist had been startled. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah threw open the bedroom door and fumbled for the hallway light switch. When the chandelier flickered to life, the upstairs corridor was empty, just as it should be. She was turning back toward her room when she noticed it, a folded piece of cream-colored paper on the floor, as if it had been slipped beneath her door while she slept. Sarah picked it up with trembling fingers and unfolded it. The paper was heavy, expensive stationery of a type no longer made. The handwriting was elegant cursive, written with what must have been a fountain pen. "The truth lies beneath the oak. Find my journal." Ellie?" Sarah whispered to the empty hallway. Only silence answered her. Sarah barely slept for what remained of the night. When dawn finally broke, casting long shadows across her bedroom floor, she convinced herself that she had dreamed the entire episode. The piano music, the humming, the note. Except the note still lay on her nightstand where she'd placed it. Over breakfast, strong coffee and slightly stale Pop-Tarts from the box she'd brought from Boston, Sarah tried to rationalize what had happened. Old houses made noises. Pipes groaned, wood expanded and contracted. Her writer's imagination, desperate for inspiration, had transformed these ordinary sounds into music, and the note, maybe she'd found it elsewhere in the house yesterday and absent-mindedly brought it upstairs. The elegant E was certainly her grandmother's signature. Perfectly logical explanations. Yet Sarah found herself drawn to the basement door that afternoon. "The truth lies beneath," the note had said. Beneath what? The house? The ground? The basement door was solid oak, heavier than it looked. It groaned in protest as Sarah pulled it open, revealing a set of steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. Her hand found a string hanging from the ceiling, and when she tugged it, a single bulb illuminated the staircase. "Here goes nothing," she murmured, and began her descent. The temperature dropped with each step. By the time she reached the concrete floor, Sarah could see her breath misting before her face. The basement was surprisingly clean and dry. Stone walls, poured concrete floor, metal shelving units organized with military precision. Cardboard file boxes labeled in her grandmother's precise handwriting. Tax records 1980 to 1989. Christmas decorations, family photographs, Miller family history. And in the center of the room, an old steamer trunk bound with brass fittings that gleamed in the dim light as if recently polished. Sarah approached it warily, half expecting it to slam shut if she tried to open it, like something from a horror movie. But the lid lifted easily on well-oiled hinges. Inside lay neatly folded antique linens, beneath them a photo album, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal with the initials EM embossed in gold on the cover. "Eleanor Miller," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the worn leather. She carried the journal upstairs to the library, curled up in a wing-back chair beside a window overlooking the lake, and began to read. The journal's first entry was dated April 15, 1985, the day after Ellie had moved into Blackwood Manor following her husband's death. I heard the piano again last night. The same nocturne. Always Chopin, always at precisely 3:13 a.m. It's been years since I last heard it, not since I visited Mother here as a teenager. I feared Victoria had finally moved on to whatever awaits us beyond this life. I'm ashamed to admit I felt disappointed at the thought. The people in town think I'm peculiar for moving back to Blackwood Manor. That haunted old place, they call it, though never to my face. They don't understand. How could they? Victoria and I have an understanding, though we've never met in the conventional sense. Sarah's breath caught. Victoria? And Ellie had heard the same nocturne at the same time, 3:13 a.m. She read on, flipping through entries spanning decades. The journal detailed Eleanor's experiences in the house, the piano music that never varied, objects that moved on their own, glimpses of a woman in a white dress, and whispered conversations with someone named Victoria Blackwood. According to Ellie's research, Victoria had been the wife of the shipping magnate Harold Blackwood, who built the manor in 1878. Victoria, 30 years younger than her husband, had been a gifted pianist who mysteriously vanished in 1891 at the age of 25. Her body was never found. Local gossip claimed Harold had murdered her in a jealous rage when he discovered her affair with James Sullivan, the music teacher who came to the house 3 times weekly to give Victoria lessons. Nothing was ever proven, but Sullivan was arrested for her disappearance. He died in prison, still protesting his innocence. Harold Blackwood lived another 20 years, dying alone in the house in 1911. With no direct heirs, the manor passed to his only surviving relative, a second cousin, Eleanor's great-grandfather, Thomas Miller. For generations, members of the Miller family had experienced strange phenomena in the house. Some fled in terror. Others, like Eleanor, formed a kind of bond with the spectral Victoria. The final entry, dated just a week before Eleanor's fatal stroke, read, October 2nd, 2023. I found something in the attic that changes everything we thought we knew about Victoria's disappearance. All these years, we believed Harold killed her in a jealous rage, but the truth is far more complex. James Sullivan wasn't merely her piano teacher or illicit lover, he was helping her escape an abusive marriage. Victoria was a prisoner in this beautiful house. The secret compartment I discovered beneath the attic floorboards contained their letters and Victoria's diary. Harold found out about their plan to flee together. Though I still don't know exactly what happened that night, I believe Victoria is earthbound because she needs someone to uncover the truth, to find what Harold did with her. The old oak tree by the lake, there's something about it in her final diary entry. I'm too frail now to investigate properly. Perhaps Sarah will come as I've requested in my will. She's always been sensitive to such things, even as a child. She would sit at the foot of the stairs and have conversations with someone none of the rest of us could see. Richard was so angry when he caught her. That's when he stopped bringing her to visit me. Sarah will help Victoria find peace. I know she will. Sarah closed the journal, her mind reeling. Her childhood imaginary friend at Grandma Ellie's house, who wasn't imaginary at all. She moved to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in watercolor shades of orange and purple. In the twilight, she could just make out the massive oak tree that stood sentinel at the edge of Blackwood Lake, its gnarled silhouette stark against the darkening sky. The sensible thing would be to wait until morning to explore. But Sarah had never been particularly sensible. The beam of her flashlight bounced along the overgrown path leading down to the lake. A nearly full moon hung low on the horizon, its reflection shimmering on the water's surface. A breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the musty scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. The oak tree was enormous, at least 6 feet in diameter, its massive branches reaching outward like arthritic fingers, some extending over the dark water of the lake. Its roots erupted from the ground in twisted knots before plunging back into the earth, creating natural hollows and hiding places. Sarah circled the tree, her flashlight revealing nothing but bark scarred by decades of exposure to the elements. "What am I supposed to be looking for?" she said aloud, frustration edging her voice. As if in answer, the breeze suddenly intensified, sending dead leaves skittering across the ground, and with it came the faint strains of piano music, the same nocturne she had heard in the house. The wind swirled around her, lifting her hair and tugging at her jacket. The leaves on the ground moved in a deliberate pattern, gathering near one of the massive roots that extended toward the water's edge. Sarah knelt down, brushing aside the leaves. Carved into the ancient bark, weathered but still legible, were two sets of initials, VB and JS, surrounded by a rough heart. "Victoria Blackwood and James Sullivan," she whispered. She ran her fingers over the carving, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time and weather. Her flashlight beam followed the massive root to where it disappeared into the muddy bank of the lake and caught a glint of something metallic partially buried in the soft earth. Sarah dug with her bare hands, cold mud squelching between her fingers. Gradually, she uncovered a small metal box, its once shiny surface now green with corrosion. Despite decades in the damp ground, the box's latch still functioned. Inside, protected by the watertight seal, lay a small velvet jewelry box and a folded letter. The paper was fragile with age, but the ink remained legible. A man's handwriting, bold and decisive. "My dearest Victoria, all is prepared. The carriage will collect us tomorrow at midnight. Meet me at our oak as planned. By this time the next day we will be on a ship bound for Europe, far from Blackwood Manor and your monstrous husband. Wear this ring next to your heart until I can place it properly upon your finger as we exchange our vows. Soon, my love. Very soon. Forever yours, James." The velvet box contained a simple gold band inset with a single diamond, not ostentatious but beautiful in its simplicity. "They were going to elope," Sarah murmured. "Yes, but we never got the chance." The voice behind her was soft but distinct. Sarah whirled around, dropping the letter. A woman stood at the edge of the water, young, perhaps 25, with dark hair piled atop her head in the elaborate style of the late Victorian era. Her white dress was high-necked and modest, yet elegantly tailored to her slender frame. She was beautiful, but her form was transparent in the moonlight, the surface of the lake visible through her body. Sarah gasped, but didn't run. Something in the woman's expression, longing, hope, sorrow, kept her rooted to the spot. "You're Victoria," she said softly. The spectral figure nodded, a sad smile gracing her lips. "And you are Eleanor's granddaughter. She told me you would come." "What happened to you?" Sarah asked, barely above a whisper. Victoria's form wavered like a reflection on troubled water. "Harold discovered our plans. He intercepted one of James's letters, carelessness on my part. I left it in my music folio." Her gaze drifted to the lake, its surface black in the darkness. "He confronted me here, at our meeting place. The things he said, the rage in his eyes." She shuddered at the memory. "There was a struggle. I fell, or was pushed. The back of my head struck one of these roots." Victoria gestured toward the lake. "My body has been in these waters for 132 years, weighed down with stones from the garden. Harold made it appear I had run away with James. He planted evidence, wrote a false letter in my hand. When James came looking for me, Harold had him arrested for my murder. He died in prison, still professing his innocence." Sarah looked from Victoria to the dark waters. "That's why you've remained. To be found? To be reunited with James," Victoria corrected gently. "And to clear his name. History remembers him as a murderer, a manipulator who seduced a married woman and then killed her. It's a lie that has persisted for over a century." Sarah clutched the ring box tightly. "I'll help you," she promised. "I'll find your body, tell the true story." Victoria's smile was radiant, transforming her sorrowful countenance. "I knew you would. Even as a child, you understood me. You were my imaginary friend," Sarah realized. "The lady in the white dress who played games with me when I visited Grandma Ellie." "You were never afraid," Victoria said softly. "Not like the others." A cloud passed over the moon, momentarily dimming the landscape. When the light returned, Victoria was gone, but the piano music lingered, drifting on the night breeze, a promise of resolution to come. The Millfield Gazette ran the story on its front page 2 weeks later. Blackwood Mystery Solved. After 132 years, human remains recovered from lake identified as missing woman. Local authorities had recovered human remains from Blackwood Lake after a tip from Sarah Miller, the new owner of the historic Blackwood Manor. Forensic experts confirmed the skeleton belonged to a woman who had died in the late 19th century. The skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma. Metal weights found with the remains matched decorative stones still present in Blackwood Manor's garden. Historical documents discovered by Miss Miller, including letters and diaries hidden in the house, suggested that Victoria Blackwood had been murdered by her husband Harold, not by music teacher James Sullivan, who had been convicted of the crime and died in prison. The town held a proper burial for Victoria's remains in the Millfield Cemetery, next to a grave that had been added in a special ceremony, that of James Sullivan, posthumously exonerated. Sarah stood alone after the small service, watching as the last of the curious onlookers departed. The autumn day was perfect. Crisp air, bright sunshine, leaves in their full glory. "Thank you," came a whisper on the breeze. Sarah turned to see Victoria standing beside the freshly covered grave, her form now much fainter than before, almost transparent in the daylight. Beside her stood the translucent figure of a man about her age, dressed in the formal attire of the late 19th century, his expression one of wonderment as he gazed at Victoria. "James," Victoria said, her voice carrying to Sarah though no one else could hear it. "She found us. She told them the truth." James turned to Sarah, bowing formally. "My eternal gratitude, Miss Miller," he said, his voice like the rustle of leaves. As Sarah watched, James extended his hand to Victoria. She took it, their fingers intertwining. When their hands touched, both figures seemed to become more solid for just a moment, more present. Victoria's smile was luminous, her eyes bright with joy instead of sorrow. Together, the two figures faded into the autumn sunlight, visible one moment and gone the next, like the last notes of a beautiful song lingering in memory. Sarah returned to Blackwood Manor that evening to find the house changed. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air was gone, replaced by a comfortable silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway still chimed the hours, but the mysterious piano music never played again. In the months that followed, Sarah wrote her novel. Not the psychological thriller her editor had expected, but the story of Victoria and James, their tragic end, and their eventual reunion. When published the following fall, it became an unexpected bestseller, bringing visitors to Millfield eager to glimpse the famous Blackwood Manor and perhaps its former spectral resident. Sarah often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over the lake and the old oak tree. On particularly still nights, she sometimes imagined she could hear the faint notes of a nocturne drifting across the water. But whether it was memory or something more mysterious, she never knew for certain. And perhaps that was as it should be. Some mysteries are meant to remain partially unsolved, reminding us that the veil between this world and whatever lies beyond may be thinner than we imagine. And now, dear listeners, as you drift toward sleep, I wonder, what forgotten stories might the walls of your home hold? What whispers might you hear in those moments between wakefulness and dreams? Have you ever felt that prickling sensation on the back of your neck, That unmistakable feeling of being watched when you're completely alone. Remember how our story began, with that very feeling that Sarah experienced in Blackwood Manor. If you've ever experienced something you can't quite explain, a cold spot in an otherwise warm room, the sensation of being observed when no one is there, the sound of footsteps in an empty hallway, share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more atmospheric bedtime stories that explore that shadowy border between our world and the next. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And if there's a particular type of gentle haunting you'd like to hear about in future episodes, let me know in the comments. Sweet dreams, or perhaps sweet hauntings. Story number 4. Have you ever been jolted awake at exactly 3:17 a.m., your heart pounding, with the unshakable feeling that you're not alone? That happened to me last October in my grandmother's old Victorian home in rural Massachusetts. And what I discovered changed me forever. The strange thing is, I never believed in ghosts before that night. Now, I'm not so sure what to believe anymore. Before I share my story, I want to know if you've ever experienced something similar. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt that unexplainable presence in the middle of the night. And if you make it to the end of this story, I'll reveal the one thing I discovered that might actually protect you if it ever happens to you. Now, let's begin the story. I inherited my grandmother's house in Gloucester, Massachusetts last fall. It was one of those picture-perfect New England homes. 3 stories of weathered clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, and more rooms than I knew what to do with. After living in my cramped Boston apartment for years, this place felt like a mansion. Though I quickly discovered that all that extra space comes with its own kind of loneliness. My decision to move in wasn't immediate. I'd initially planned to sell it. The commute to my marketing job in Boston was over an hour. And what did a single 30-something need with a sprawling Victorian? But something about the place called to me during that first walkthrough after the funeral. Maybe it was the way sunlight filtered through the stained glass above the stairwell, casting rainbow patterns across the hardwood floors. Or perhaps it was simply the flood of childhood memories from summers spent exploring its nooks and crannies while my parents traveled abroad. "You're making a mistake," my mother had warned over the phone, her voice tinny with the distance from her Florida retirement community. "That house is too big, too old, too isolated. You'll regret it by Christmas." I almost called the realtor a dozen times that first month. Almost packed it all back up. The first few weeks were busy enough, cleaning out closets full of my grandmother's belongings, sorting through ancient photo albums, figuring out which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck when it rained, learning the personality of the house, I guess you could say. Most evenings, I'd settle into the window seat in the library with a cup of tea, watching the sunset over the distant Atlantic. A peaceful routine, one that made me feel connected to my grandmother, who had spent countless evenings in that very spot. This is exactly what I needed, I told myself one night, 3 weeks after moving in. A fresh start. Some quiet. Little did I know what kind of quiet I was in for. Sleep came easy that night. The October air had turned crisp, and I had piled 3 quilts on the 4-poster bed in the master bedroom. My bedroom now, though it still felt strange to think of it that way, and then, 3:17 a.m., my eyes snapped open. The room was dark. Not the comfortable darkness of a sleeping house, but a strange, heavy darkness that seemed to press against my skin. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the darkness had weight. I lay perfectly still, my breath shallow in my chest. Something had woken me, a sound, a dream, I couldn't remember, but I knew with absolute certainty that something was different. The air felt colder, not the pleasant autumn chill that had lulled me to sleep, but a penetrating cold that seemed to bypass my layers of quilts entirely. My breath clouded in front of my face. And then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic creaking from downstairs, like someone slowly rocking in the old wooden chair by the fireplace. Creak, pause, creak, pause. It's just the house settling, I whispered to myself. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. Houses don't settle in perfect measured intervals. Like someone keeping time, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the screen illuminating with a harsh blue glow. 3:18 a.m. I had only been awake for a minute, but it felt like hours. The creaking continued downstairs. Steady, patient, as if whatever was making the sound had all the time in the world. I should get up and check, I thought. But my body refused to move. Every instinct told me to stay exactly where I was, beneath my grandmother's quilts, in the safety of my bed. So I lay there listening. As the creaking continued, creak, pause, creak, pause, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. My ears strained in the darkness, seeking any hint of sound. The familiar ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant whisper of waves against the rocky shore. But there was nothing, as if the entire world outside my bedroom had ceased to exist. Then, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the main staircase, 1, 2, 3. Each step punctuated by a pause that made my heart hammer against my ribs. It was coming upstairs. I clutched the edge of my quilt, pulling it up to my chin like a child hiding from monsters. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. It's the wind. It's the old wood expanding and contracting. It's your imagination, fueled by too many horror movies and the unfamiliarity of a new house. I'd always prided myself on being practical. Growing up with a physicist father and a mother who taught high school chemistry, I'd been raised to seek logical explanations. There's always a rational answer, Dad would say whenever I'd come to him with childhood fears about shadows on my bedroom wall or strange sounds in the attic, and for 32 years that philosophy had served me well, even when my grandmother would tell her stories about feelings she had in the house, moments when she swore she could sense my grandfather's presence after his death. I'd smile indulgently. Grief manifests in many ways, I'd explained to my mother, who shared more of Grandma's sensibilities than Dad's scientific mind. The human brain seeks patterns, connections, explanations for loss. How confidently I dispensed that wisdom from the safe distance of my logical worldview. How utterly useless that wisdom seemed now. But none of those explanations accounted for the deliberate, measured pace of those footsteps, or the fact that they were getting closer. 4, 5, 6. I counted each one, mapping their progress up the staircase in my mind. 13 steps total. I had counted them myself when I moved in, amused by the supposedly unlucky number. 7, 8, 9. My breath caught in my throat. The footsteps had reached the landing, just outside my bedroom door. Then silence again. That horrible, expectant silence. The brass doorknob turned slowly. I could see it rotating in the faint moonlight that filtered through the curtains, inch by inch. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to see what might come through that door. But closing my eyes only heightened my other senses. The soft creak as the door swung open on hinges I had been meaning to oil. The sudden shift in the air as if something had displaced it. The temperature in the room plummeted. My hands, clutching the quilt, went numb with cold. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, just the sense of a presence standing in my doorway. Watching. Waiting. I forced my eyes open, blinking against tears of fear. But the doorway was empty. Just a rectangle of deeper darkness against the shadows of my room. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. I reached again for my phone, desperate for light, for connection to the outside world. but my fingers found only the smooth, cold surface of the nightstand. My phone was gone. That's when I heard it. The sound of breathing. Not my own rapid, frightened breaths, but something else. Slow, ragged, almost like a wheeze. It came from the foot of my bed. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice stronger now, fueled by a sudden surge of anger. This was my house now. My grandmother's house. "What do you want?" The breathing stopped. For a moment, I thought whatever presence had been there was gone. And then I felt the mattress sink slightly, as if someone had placed a hand upon it. The depression moved slowly up the side of the bed, the quilts tightening against my legs as they were pulled by an unseen weight. Something was climbing onto my bed. My body went rigid with fear. I wanted to scream, to leap from the bed and run. But where would I go? This was my home. There was nowhere to escape to in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. The weight continued its slow progress up the mattress, pausing at my side. I could feel it there, a cold spot next to my hip, seeping through the layers of quilts. And then, a whisper. So faint, I couldn't be sure if I actually heard it or just felt it against my skin. Elizabeth. My grandmother's name. Not mine. "I'm not Elizabeth," I managed to say through chattering teeth. "She's gone. She died." The cold spot beside me intensified, as if my words had angered whatever was there. The quilts pulled tighter, and I felt a pressure on my chest, not painful but insistent, like someone trying to wake me. "Please," I whispered, "I don't understand what you want." The pressure lifted slightly, and in its absence I felt a strange sensation. Not fear exactly, but a profound sadness. It washed over me like a wave, and I realized with startling clarity that it wasn't my emotion. Somehow, I was feeling what it was feeling. This presence, this spirit, was grieving. I took a shaky breath. "You're looking for my grandmother. For Elizabeth." The cold spot shifted, moving closer to my face. I could smell something now. The faint scent of pine and tobacco that had always clung to my grandfather's clothing. He had died 15 years before my grandmother, when I was just a child. "Harold," I whispered, my grandfather's name. The scent strengthened, and I felt something like fingers brush against my cheek, cold but gentle, almost hesitant. My fear began to ebb, replaced by a strange sense of wonder and sadness. My grandmother had lived in this house alone for 15 years after my grandfather died. Had he been here all that time, trying to reach her? "She's gone," I said softly. "I'm sorry, but she's not here anymore." The weight on the mattress shifted again, moving away from me. The cold spot dissipated, and I heard what sounded like a sigh, distant and hollow, and then the footsteps again, moving away from the bed, across the room to the doorway, pausing there as if looking back. I sat up slowly, peering through the darkness. "Wait!" I called out, surprising myself. "Don't go!" But the footsteps continued back down the hallway, slow and measured, just as they had come, down the 13 steps of the staircase, one by one. I sat there in the darkness for what felt like hours, listening as the footsteps faded away. When I finally found the courage to reach for the lamp on my nightstand, I half expected my hand to pass through empty air. But the switch was there, and light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows. My phone sat on the nightstand exactly where I had left it. The screen showed 3:42 a.m. Only 25 minutes had passed since I first woke. I got up on shaky legs and walked to the doorway. The house felt different now. Still old, still full of creaks and sighs, but somehow less unknown. I had shared it, however briefly, with whatever remained of my grandfather. My hand traced the smooth wooden banister as I made my way into the hallway. The grandfather clock near the staircase showed 3:45 a.m., its pendulum swinging with hypnotic precision. I noticed something I'd overlooked during my months of living here. Tiny initials carved into the dark wood of the clock's base. H+E, 1953. Harold and Elizabeth. My grandparents had marked their beginnings in this house, leaving traces of their love story in its very bones. The revelation sent a peculiar warmth through me despite the lingering chill in the air. How many other secret messages had they left behind? How many other pieces of themselves remained embedded in this place I now called home? As children, my cousins and I had always thought the house impossibly ancient. But now I realized it wasn't the house that held the age. It was the accumulation of moments, of lives, of stories that had unfolded within these walls. My story was just the newest layer, settling atop the ones that came before. I made my way downstairs, following the path those footsteps had taken. In the living room, the old wooden rocking chair by the fireplace was moving slightly, as if someone had just risen from it. On the small table beside it sat a faded photograph I hadn't noticed before. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It showed my grandparents, much younger than I had ever known them, standing on the porch of this very house. My grandmother was laughing, her head thrown back in joy. My grandfather looked at her with such obvious love that it made my chest ache. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my grandmother's neat handwriting, Harold and me, first day in our new home, 1953. They had loved this house. They had loved each other in this house, and somehow my grandfather had never left. I returned to bed as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Sleep seemed impossible after what I had experienced, but exhaustion eventually won out. As I drifted off, I thought I felt that same gentle touch against my cheek, and I wasn't afraid. The next night, I placed the photograph on my nightstand before going to bed. "Good night, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. "She loved you too. She always did." I slept through the night undisturbed. Part 3. A week passed, then 2. October gave way to November, and the first snow of the season dusted the yard like powdered sugar. I began to wonder if that night had been a dream, or perhaps just the product of an overactive imagination, triggered by sleeping in a strange house. But then came Thanksgiving, my first holiday alone in the big house. My parents had invited me to join them in Florida, where they'd retired, but something kept me in Massachusetts. A sense of obligation, perhaps, or curiosity. I spent the day cooking a small turkey and all the traditional sides, following my grandmother's recipes that I'd found tucked into an old Betty Crocker cookbook. As evening fell, I set the dining room table for one. Then, on impulse, added a second place setting. Just in case, I told myself, feeling both foolish and hopeful. I ate my Thanksgiving dinner in the formal dining room, something my grandmother had always insisted upon for holidays. Candles lit. Best china used, the whole ritual. "I wish you were here, Grandma," I said to the empty chair across from me. "You too, Grandpa. I have so many questions I never got to ask you both." After dinner, drowsy from turkey and wine, I fell asleep on the couch in the living room. The fire I'd built had burned down to embers, casting a warm red glow over the space. And then, 3:17 a.m. Again, my eyes snapped open. The room was cold. The fire completely out now, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it immediately, that same presence from before. The rocking chair by the dead fireplace was moving. Creak. Pause. Creak. Pause. But this time, I could see a faint outline sitting there. Not a full apparition, nothing so dramatic, just a suggestion of a form. A different density to the darkness, shaped like a man. "Grandpa?" I whispered, sitting up slowly. "Is that you?" The rocking stopped. The shape seemed to turn toward me, though I couldn't make out any features. "I'm not afraid," I told it, and realized it was true. "I just want to understand." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and the shape in the rocking chair became more distinct. I could see the outline of broad shoulders, a head slightly bowed, and the faint glow of what looked like a pipe, though no smoke rose from it. My grandfather had always smoked a pipe in the evenings. My grandmother had hated it, banishing him to the porch in summer and allowing him only this spot by the fireplace in winter. "She kept your pipe," I said softly. "Did you know that? After you died, she kept it in her bedside table. I found it when I was cleaning out her things." The figure seemed to nod, the glow of the ghostly pipe brightening slightly. "Why did you come to me that night?" I asked. "Why now?" The figure rose from the rocking chair, tall, just as my grandfather had been in life. It moved to the mantelpiece where I had placed framed family photos. A translucent hand, I could see it clearly now in the moonlight from the window, reached out and seemed to touch one of the frames. I stood up, my heart pounding but not with fear. I moved closer, trying to see which photo had drawn his attention. It was an old picture of my grandmother, taken on her 70th birthday. She was standing in the garden behind the house, silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, a wide smile on her face. "You miss her," I said. It wasn't a question. The figure nodded again. "She missed you too." I reached out, hesitating just a moment before letting my hand pass through the translucent form reaching for the photograph. It was like moving my hand through a cold spot in a swimming pool. Not unpleasant, just different. The figure turned to me, and for a brief moment I thought I could see his face, my grandfather's face, just as I remembered from childhood. Kind eyes, slight smile beneath his mustache. "She's not here," I said gently, "but maybe she's waiting for you somewhere else. Maybe you don't have to stay here anymore." The figure seemed to consider this, head tilted slightly. Then it moved past me, toward the large bay window that overlooked the front yard. I followed, curious. Outside, the moon illuminated the fresh snow, making it glow with an almost supernatural light. And there, standing at the edge of the property, was another figure, smaller, feminine. Just a suggestion in the darkness, like my grandfather, but unmistakably there. "Grandma?" I breathed, pressing my hand to the cold glass. My grandfather's figure straightened, seeming to grow more solid for a moment. He turned back to me, and this time I definitely saw his face, clearer than before. He smiled. A full, warm smile that I remembered from when I was small. And then he nodded once, decisively. He moved toward the front door. Not walking exactly, but gliding with purpose. The door, which I knew I had locked before falling asleep, swung open silently. Cold air rushed in, bringing with it snowflakes that swirled around the room. My grandfather's figure paused in the doorway, looking back at me one last time. And I swear I heard his voice, not with my ears, but somehow in my mind. "Thank you," it seemed to say, "for bringing me home." Then he was gone, moving across the snowy yard toward the waiting figure in the distance. I watched from the window as the two shapes met, seemed to embrace, and then simply faded away. The snow where they had stood was undisturbed, as if nothing had been there at all. I stood at the window for a long time, tears freezing on my cheeks. Not sad tears, though there was some sadness mixed in. Mostly, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of completion. Eventually, I closed and locked the door, built up the fire again, and settled back on the couch. I didn't expect to sleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows, reflecting blindingly off the snow outside. The house felt different that morning. Still old, still creaking and sighing, but lighter somehow, as if something that had been held here had finally been released. Part 4. Winter passed into spring. The house and I came to an understanding. I forgave its drafty windows and temperamental plumbing, and in return, it sheltered me through the harsh New England weather. I began to think of it truly as my home, not just my grandmother's house that I happened to occupy. I never felt my grandfather's presence again, not in the same way. No more 3:17 a.m. awakenings, no more footsteps on the stairs. The rocking chair by the fireplace remained still unless I chose to sit in it myself. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when I sat in the library window seat with my tea, watching the sunset over the Atlantic just as my grandmother had done, I'd catch a whiff of pipe tobacco, or notice the pages of an open book ruffle, as if someone had sighed nearby. Small things, comforting things. Reminders, perhaps, that love leaves impressions on places just as it does on people. I found myself telling friends about my experience when they visited. Most smiled politely and changed the subject. A few admitted to similar encounters in old homes. One friend, Jessica, listened more intently than the others. My mom always said that spirits can get stuck, she told me one evening as we sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. Not because they want to haunt a place, but because they have unfinished business, or because they're waiting for someone. Like my grandfather waiting for my grandmother, I said. Jessica nodded. Sometimes they just need permission to go, or they need help finding whoever they're waiting for. But how did my grandmother come back for him that night? I asked. She'd been gone for months by then. Jessica smiled. Maybe she wasn't the one who was stuck. Maybe she came back because you were finally ready to see. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed, about what it means to truly see the impressions people leave behind. The love that lingers in spaces long after the people themselves are gone. Last October, on the anniversary of that first night, I placed my grandparents' photograph on the mantel, built a fire in the fireplace, and sat in the rocking chair with a cup of tea, waiting for 3:17 a.m. Outside, the maple trees that lined the driveway had turned brilliant shades of crimson and gold, just as they had the year before. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and salt from the nearby ocean. I'd come to love these sensory touchstones of autumn in New England, so different from the perpetual summer of my parents' retirement community in Florida. Over the past year, I'd made the house more my own. I'd painted the kitchen a sunny yellow that my grandmother would have found scandalously modern. I'd converted one of the spare bedrooms into a home office, allowing me to work remotely 3 days a week. I'd even started hosting monthly dinner parties for friends who'd initially been skeptical about my move to the middle of nowhere, but now found excuses to visit regularly. "This place suits you," my friend Megan had commented during her last visit. "You seem more, anchored here." She was right. Something about caring for this old house had steadied me in ways my previous life never had. I'd even started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but Michael from the local bookstore had been bringing me recommendations based on the history of the area. Last week, he'd suggested we visit the Maritime Museum together. Life was taking root here, new stories beginning, even as I honored the old ones. The hour came and went. The house remained peaceful. No cold spots, no footsteps, just the comfortable silence of a home at rest. As I was about to head upstairs to bed, disappointed despite myself, the lights flickered once. Just once. And a warm breeze, impossible on a cold October night with all the windows closed, ruffled my hair like a gentle hand. I smiled. "Good night," I said to the empty room. "I love you both too." That's when I realized what had really happened that night a year before. It wasn't that my grandfather had been trapped here all those years. It was that he had stayed to watch over the home they had shared, stayed until someone else was ready to take his place as guardian. Me. Now, I wake sometimes in the night, but not from fear. I wake because this house is alive with memories, with stories, with love that refuses to fade. And I've learned that what we call hauntings are often just love that's found a way to echo through time. So if you ever wake at 3:17 a.m. with the certainty that you're not alone, don't be afraid. Listen, pay attention. Sometimes the spirits that wake us in the night aren't trying to frighten us. They're trying to tell us something important. Something like, love remains. Love always remains. And here's what I promise to tell you. The one thing I discovered that might protect you if this ever happens to you. Acknowledge them. Speak to them. Help them find what they're looking for, even if what they're looking for is you. Because sometimes the most haunted places are simply the most loved. If you've experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. What woke you in the middle of the night? And were you brave enough to answer? If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more tales from my grandmother's house. There are other stories here waiting to be told, and I'm finally ready to listen. Sweet dreams, or perhaps sweet hauntings. Now, sleep, or at least try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, soft where wet, wrong. Like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot behind the curtain every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still. Let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. and it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you, and comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can.